Hello everyone, welcome to Unity. Today I'm going to show you an extension I've been making for the last couple of months. It's called Low Poly World. We first off have to place a Unity terrain on the ground and tweak around with these values and shape it as you please. Or you could go into the height map and import a raw file. We have a few examples in the example files and folders that you should have already gotten if you have downloaded the extension, and we're just going to go on with the low poly world. So when you've created a new low poly world, you want to plop in a terrain data into the field. Oh Jesus, let me rename please. Okay, there we go. We have this field where you need to plop in a terrain data. We have the example data from the example files, and we also have the new terrain that we've just created over here. So let's select that and we get the green generate button. We can just press this at once and that will give us a terrain, essentially being the same terrain as this Unity terrain, but this time it's flat shaded instead of soft shaded, which is of course the difference between low poly look and normal smooth look of the terrain. So this is actually quite high poly, and you can see that by all the details you've gotten from the other terrain. But what we can do actually with this system is go into the low poly world and go into size tools, and you see you have these two checkboxes. You have the force resolution, which is the one we're going to play with now, and you have the force size, which is forcing the size to be the same as the terrain of Unity, the Unity terrain. So we were going to uncheck this one if I can, and we were going to multiply this number by say 4 for starters, and we're going to regenerate. Now you can see that the terrain has actually gotten quite a lot nicer in my opinion. It looks more like a low poly world should in my opinion. But we still miss some color. And also, just to be sure, let's place a capsule just to see how this will compare to a normal player in Unity. Okay, there we go. Well, first off, I'd say the terrain is, well, the mountains are too small to be sort of realistic. So we're going to adjust the size as well, and for this we need to uncheck the force size, and then we want to adjust this number. Let's multiply it by say 5, and of course now we need to adjust this by 5 as well to maintain the same resolution as we had. And let's regenerate this. Now this is much larger, and you can already see that this tiny little guy is, well, he's very tiny compared to the terrain, which is more like we sort of want it. But you might want to readjust this by, let's say, splitting out by 2, perhaps. There we go. And this seems to be a lot better. Okay, so what is the last option in the size tools, you might ask? Well, this terrain is of course quite large, and the mesh is of course quite large as well. Unity actually has a max capacity for vertices, which is why you have to split up a large mesh into several meshes, which is what I've done with the Unity terrain here, well, the low poly terrain. So the mesh, well, the chunk divisor basically divides the mesh into 8 pieces along this axis and this axis, so along the X and Z axis, and this one you can actually adjust a bit to match your values if you want to, say, optimize the game further. So if you have parts of the terrain not showing up for the player, you might not want to render them at all, which is why you have the option to split them up into several parts, as well as keep the meshes within the Unity maximum. Now let's go over to the color tools. Now the color tools are the more advanced stuff in this package. First off, let's open up the color tools, and we have a few options here. We have the height, which is basically how high should this gradient go from this point to this point. So let's say this point is actually the lowest point of the terrain. I can show this by doing this, and of course now we haven't set the height yet, so you can only see the red parts around here. We want to change this to actually somewhere around 350, I think, and we can regenerate now, and you instantly see that this one has affected the entire terrain. So that's more like it. And of course we want to use a preset for this one, just to show off the abilities of this plugin. We might want to actually adjust it up to 400 perhaps. So let's do that and reload. Yeah, this seems to be quite nice indeed. Okay, so you might see that even though we have the lowest value to be sort of sandy, this doesn't show up down here. This is because we have over the entire terrain there is no point that is actually down at the 0 value of height. And what you can do about this is just to place this one further up, and you should start seeing it now. We have actually got a button here that says auto reload, but this one is a bit dangerous if you have quite large meshes. It should be fine now for this one. It's just a little bit laggy, but for sort of the purpose of finding the right values, this works quite nice. And also what you can do, of course, is adjust the resolution while you're doing the color work, just to find the right color values and heights and stuff. So now I think we have gotten over the height. We should have sand. Okay, let's remove this one. I think this is fine. You can put up a color randomness. This will mostly affect these areas where you have sort of the transition between colors, and you can see this already here. You get some sort of I would say smoother, but it's sort of more random in the transition. So it's not really smoother, but it might give you a looker after, so it's in there for you. But the thing we really want to look at is the use steepness option, because this option is really powerful. If I load in this gradient, I'll talk about the alpha values later on, and if I change the normal, sort of the sedimentary colors to be this one, this will be just perfect. If I regenerate reload the colors now, you'll see why. Okay, so after adjusting the values a bit and getting the right position of the gradient values, this is actually what you will probably spend most time with getting correctly, but hopefully the auto reload will help you a bit doing this stuff. So the steepness palette actually works like this. We'll talk about the normal color values first. The steeper your polygon is, essentially meaning all of these triangles, the steeper that goes, the more towards the right hand side the color will tend to be, and the flatter, sort of facing upwards the polygon is, the more close to the left hand side it will be. So if we have sort of totally flat areas, then the color of those will be green, multiplied of course by the colors of this one. So let's say we have white in this area, then multiply white by green and you'll get green. So that's how this works. It's basically like Photoshop's multiply blend mode, essentially. So what does the alpha values do, you might ask? Well, earlier on we adjusted the terrain to have sort of the sand bit down here, and you see this sand bit has sort of been affected by exactly that. If I change this to be 100%, you'll see what I mean. Essentially this overlaps all the color of the the color palette, the normal color palette. And this is of course because it's multiplied. So what you want to do is change the alpha values for this to make sure that the multiplication isn't actually valid within these areas. So this is sort of the validity of the multiplication. So if I changed it to something like this, you should get a result more like the one we want. So there we go. The same thing goes for the top. You might not want like green areas on top of your hills and on top of your snow, so that's why we have the alpha value set to a low one up here. You can see this by doing that. Of course this is not what we want, and that's why we do this. So that's the steepness palette. We still have one more palette to use. This one is sort of, I'm not sure yet why you would want to use this, but the only use for it, as I have found so far, is sort of to amplify the ambient effect of the terrain. So this time we're going to set up the directional light, which is the sun in this case. We've set up in the scene, and we are going to set up some weird values just to show off what it does. The polygons facing the sun should sort of turn more, I guess, red in this case, we could use as an example, and the ones facing away from the light, sort of in the shadow, should be blue. This is just an extreme show off for you. So if I reload now, you can see this quite clearly. It is all wrong. This should not be a terrain, unless you're going sort of for a Oblivion style. I don't know. Anyways, the tool is there, and you can use it with softer values as well. And you, of course, can do height adjustments. So if I want to sort of apply this for lower values or lower heights, I can, of course, change the alpha values of the lower parts to be 0, and instantly you can see that the sand is still sand. So that's the angle palette. I'll set up a more decent tool, well, a decent show off for this one. There we go. I've set up a angle palette that is sort of more what you should expect if you're using it for ambient enhancement. Of course you can't really see the shadows now, but they should be the faces turning away from the sun should turn into some more bluish color, and of course the values turning towards the sun should sort of glow a little bit more yellowish as the sun lights them up. And of course, if you use this with the use steepness as well, both of these will be multiplied, and you might get a huge mess, or you might get quite a nice result like this one. I get the sense that this scene is sort of a afternoon, and that is just by using the different palettes you can set up and tweak. And of course, you also can set up a custom angle if you want to do that. By adjusting the angle of attack, I suppose you could call this. And you can rotate this around the x-axis by sliding this value, and you can rotate it around the y-axis by this value. We have one more thing I can show off, which is the water. This is still sort of in the works, but if you generate now, you'll get a huge flat mesh. And this is of course because we have not set up the animation. If I regenerate now, you'll see all of these tiny waves, and let's actually change the size of this, because having a resolution of, even though this is quite a low resolution, it will take up quite a lot of power by just running it. I could show it off here, and I will, but as you can see, it's very slow, and that is because it's doing a calculation for every single corner at the same time, and well, that results in some well, laggy behavior. That's because we have this huge mesh, And that's why I advise you to not use this with a huge resolution and not a huge size either. So there we go. Let's focus on it and let's change up the colors a bit, because this one also works with the colors as the terrain does. So let's choose a nice sort of top for the waves and then a bottom for the waves, sort of more darkish, and then you can adjust it like this, I guess. There we go. Okay, we've set up the color palette and we want to adjust this one to probably around 1.4. And okay, that's sort of nice, I guess. We could change it to probably 0.6 because we have the wave height here. This one doesn't really take a terrain data into account for anything. So okay, let's adjust it down. Okay, I guess this is fine. We can show it off as this. You can also use the steepness, of course, for these ones, which will give you some interesting results, I suppose you can call it. And this one should actually run quite nice. And of course, just to show it off as well, if you uncheck the animated and regenerate now, everything still works, but the vertices are not actually transformed up. I can amplify this effect by doing this, and you'll see quite clearly that this is more like water waves and stuff like that. You can play around with these, get some higher values for the speed and for, of course, the size of the waves, and you can create quite a lot of crazy stuff with this one. So I hope you like the plugin I've been making and well, the extension for Unity. And if you find any bugs or if you otherwise have some feedback, I would much like to hear it. And yeah, I guess that's it for this video. Thank you for watching and have a nice day, and I hope you like the tool.